Today's episode is very special in that I'm joined by both a school founder and a parent. So we'll hear two interesting perspectives on the draw toward alternative education options and specifically learner driven education. Sarah Max is a former public school teacher who co founded Acton Invictus in 2021 in Leander, Texas, just outside of Austin. Acton Invictus is part of the global Acton Academy microschool network that was founded in 2009 and now includes over 300 schools serving thousands of learners. Tim Tran is an entrepreneur and one of Acton Invictus's original founding parents. Both of his children attend the school. Sarah and Tim, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you,
Hi,
Carrie. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I love having both this entrepreneur founder perspective and the parent perspective in one episode. So this is really exciting. But let's start, Sarah, with you as the creator, as the founder of Acton Invictus, again, part of the Acton Academy microschool network. Tell us about your journey. You're a former public school teacher, turned stay-at-home mom, turned entrepreneur. So how did you get into education in the first place? And what was your journey like through public education, then as a stay-at-home parent, then as an entrepreneur?
Okay. Let's see. So originally I was a theater arts major on acting scholarship, but one of my day jobs to put myself through school was working with children. And I remember, early into that journey, realizing that being with them was my happy place, that there is such a freshness and such life to being with them. So I totally switched majors and went into education. So I graduated from Texas A&M in the early aughts. I won't tell you how far back that was. And I was primarily a fifth grade teacher through most of my career, over 10 years. And so I started experimenting a little bit towards the end of it with, learning for mastery, giving children more ownership of their learning journey. But, there were so many constraints within trying to fit into the public school model, and just disillusionment from what I thought it was going to be versus what I saw it actually was. And so I decided, when I was expecting my firstborn, I told my husband, I was like, for right now, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I know someday I'm going to do something with education, but I can't go back to public education. I don't believe in it anymore. And I can't do something, that I don't believe in. And I'm not sending our children there. So I was a stay-at-home parent for a while. And actually, I first came across Acton Academy when I was helping my sister find a new learning environment for her oldest. This was during my stay-at-home mom period. And she knew that her son was a lot like her, and his experience, if she put him in a traditional educational environment, that he would be in the principal's office on the daily. He's highly gifted, but also highly ADHD. And she knew homeschooling was not for her. And that's when I first came across Acton Academy. And I was like, I don't understand what this is, but you need to check it out. And so my nephew has been at another Acton Academy for about 8 years now. And when I was trying to figure out what type of learning environment I wanted for my own children, I couldn't find anything that resonated like Acton Academy. And I knew like it had all the components that I believed after working with children for years, like what they needed. And so I started the audition process to have my own and was very surprised when I got it.
So great. And of course, you're at the Acton Epicenter, Acton
Mhm.
Academy, founded in Austin in 2009 by Laura and Jeff Sandiford. Now,
Mhm.
many Acton Academies kind of in that larger greater Austin area. I want to turn over to you, Tim, in just a minute, but just a follow-up question for you, Sarah. You said that as a public school educator, there was a feeling of disillusionment between what you thought it would be and what it was for you within the traditional classroom. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit more. What were you expecting and what did you find?
Well, when I started off, I was thinking the idea of inspiring all of these young minds and the classroom being like the safe haven for children, that they couldn't wait to get there and just, you know, learn, that they would love learning. Um, I remember kind of a pivotal moment for me when I was doing my methods classes, which is right before the student teaching part of my journey. I was observing in a fifth grade reading teacher's classroom, and they had just come back from the library. And this was when Harry Potter was, first coming out, was all the rage. And this young man had come back from the library, had the newest edition of the Harry Potter, and was excitedly taking it to his desk. And the teacher for that classroom called him out in the middle of all of his peers about choosing a book that was above his AR reading level and making him march right back to the library to go get something that was at his level. And just seeing him like slump down in his seat. And I remember, because this is like a physical memory for me too, like my stomach started hurting and I just felt the shame for him and just this questioning, like, when is he ever going to pick up a book because it looks interesting, because he'll always be like, is this out of my depth? Is this, so that kind of was the start of the disillusionment. And just working in different schools. I've worked in Title I schools. I've worked in more affluent community neighborhood schools, and just seeing how children are quickly labeled as below grade level, and that label follows them throughout their school career, and just realizing it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to group people by age and expect them to all learn the exact same thing at the exact same time. So what I saw as a fifth grade teacher was by the time children came to me, the light had already gone out.
Mm.
And it was an uphill battle to try to get them to enjoy learning again. And it was heartbreaking because children come into the world eager. They come into the world curious and wanting to know more. Um, and just that educational model it just dims that light. So
Wow, what a powerful story. Tim, I'd love to turn to you now and hear your journey to alternative education for your children. I know it started with a Montessori preschool and then you discovered Acton. So tell us kind of what was your pathway in embracing alternative education over the traditional model?
Yeah, sure. And I think, one of the things is I was a quote unquote like customer. So I went through the public school system myself. I was in the most well-funded public school system in the United States, and that was Fairfax County school system. That was in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., like 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. So I did everything that I was supposed to do. I went through the public school system, took advanced placement classes. Fortunately, I did well enough in high school to get into a college. Went to Virginia Tech and got an engineering degree. Fortunately, did well enough in that to get hired by big consulting firms in Washington, D.C. And when I came out, I realized I was ill prepared for the real world. Having doing everything that I was supposed to do, I still felt like I was ill prepared. And so when my wife and I had our first child, I started to think, I was like, is there anything else? And so I started listening more podcasts. I came across Acton Academy as one of the podcasts I was listening to. And at the time in Northern Virginia, there was no Acton. There is an Acton now, but there was no Acton when we were there. And so, we were like, oh, well, so what's the second alternative? So the second alternative was like a Montessori. So we put our kid in Montessori since he was 2. And since my wife and I are both entrepreneurs, we crave freedom. That's kind of the reason why we wanted to have like our own business. And so when the business started taking off, we were traveling a little bit more. And so we're like, let's try to homeschool a little bit, maybe. Let's give that a shot. Because it like the Montessori style didn't really fit into or like the schedule of Montessori didn't really fit into our lifestyle. And so we were very quickly we realized we were not homeschooling parents. Like we didn't have the patience for it. And I think we just really didn't have I guess just like the knack of teaching to our child. And I think there's also this this benefit of separation between parent and teacher, and or in the Acton model they call it guides. And so I think that was where that dynamic, we realized like it's probably better that our son and daughter goes to a school that will allow them to do that. And so that's why we decided, it's like, okay, well, Acton is in Austin. Let's just move to Austin. We'll figure it out. And so we decided to, when we made that decision, we went from decision to moving to Austin in 42 days. We sold everything that we didn't need, and we just moved to Austin, and we got a rental, and then we're like, we'll just figure it out. And so when we got here, the main Acton Academy is in downtown Austin, is in East Austin. And we realized like that's not the lifestyle. So we were like, let's just move to like a place. And luckily, by the time that we moved and we were ready to put our son in school, Sarah had just opened up an Acton in Leander. And we're like, this is like perfect timing, and so I actually seeked her out because I Googled it. I was like, is there an Acton in Leander? And so I Googled her, and I think it hadn't been more than a week since she like posted like her business on the internet. And so like I seeked her out, and we're like, hey, can we have coffee? And then that's kind of how it all started.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Tim, I mean, you moved states to
Mhm.
specifically go to a place where there were some Acton academies, and even then, just sort of happened upon Sarah's brand new Acton Academy. I just think that's such an amazing story. And so, Sarah, tell us about your startup journey. Obviously, you auditioned to be accepted into the Acton Academy Microschool Network. I know that the Acton founders receive thousands of applications from prospective Acton founders, and so you made the cut and were able to launch. So what happened next for you? I guess how did you go from kind of being accepted into the network to then opening your doors? What was that process like?
Well, it was quite the journey, and my journey I wouldn't recommend for starters. So, I received my notification that I was, accepted to open my own Acton, and I believe it was February of 2021. And I went to my church to ask them because they were in the process of building their permanent facility in Leander, and I went to ask them, can I start my little Acton Academy in the new facility once it opens, which was expected like 18 months later. And they said, sure, but why don't you start it here now? And I was like, okay. And I walked out and I was like, I just agreed to start a school in 6 months. And so it was, I would not recommend that because so much of it is, the paving the way for an entrepreneurial, especially for a school where people will be sending their children, is to build up trust in the community, to let people know you are there. And so it was kind of a bumpy ride. My dad actually passed away unexpectedly 6 weeks before our first day of school. And so that part of the journey kind of, in some ways, I'm thankful that I decided to go ahead and, start my Acton journey because it kind of helped, to have something to focus on other than the grief. But, so there was lots of little bumps along the way. So we launched in September of 2021 with 5 learners, one of which was Tim's son. One was my own son, and the guide's son and my niece, and then one other child. So, but yeah, so it was interesting. It was, yeah, it was like drinking from a fire hose. This is my first entrepreneurial experience, and I'm an educator at heart. I could talk for days about that, but yeah, learning the business side of things, I'm so fortunate. Tim and his family have been not only founding families, but I've gone to him many times. He's been a mentor for me as well. Asking for advice and, what should my next move be in this area, and helping me think out of the box, which tends to be like the entrepreneurial mindset that I was lacking.
And Tim, did you have any reservations about putting your older son at the time into Acton Invictus, where it was brand new and Sarah was a new founder, or is your sort of temperament and spirit as an entrepreneur to experiment and dive into new things? I guess, what was that like for you, kind of building this school with Sarah and other founding families from the ground up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so just for context, I'm married to an artist, like an actual artist. And the reason why I say that is because I look for artists to partner up with. And so Sarah is an artist in the sense that she molds children, and she really dives deep into how a child learns, and sort of like all the different dynamics that go into it. And so the intention is there. She knows that there's all these different angles that she can approach when it comes to learning. And so knowing that, I was very comfortable with putting Zach into it, my son Zach into the school, because I know that the intention was there. I know that she was very I would say very deliberate in how she was going to run her school, and how she was going to bring on guides, and how she was going to mold the classroom. And so that wasn't really a concern of mine, that it was a new school, because I knew the business is going to shape it out, because there was a demand for it, especially in our area, since it's such a new place where everything is building up. Austin, you hear it all the time. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. And so I knew it was going to be there at some point. And so, no, I had no reservations of putting my son in there.
That's so great. And so what attracted you, Tim, to the Acton model as a parent? You said you had listened to a podcast first and heard about it, and then became increasingly intrigued, obviously jumped into this brand new Acton location. What is it about the Acton model and learner-driven education more generally that you find so interesting and special?
Yeah, I think you kind of alluded to it, is learner driven. And so when we first started in the Montessori process, it was Montessori teachers kind of teaching certain lessons, and they would kind of use the environment to allow them to learn from each other. But I think it wasn't until Acton that I started realizing that the child is naturally curious about things. And I think using Montessori as sort of the baseline, Acton sort of builds on top of that, is just allowing them to have an environment where they can start to learn themselves, and being okay with they can learn faster in certain areas of like math or reading or writing. But the metric that I always kind of lean back on is my son curious? And as long as my son is curious, I think the environment that he's in at school is great. And so we try to model that at home, where we always try to put things in front of them, limit screen time, but just allow the environment at school and the environment at home to have that, to kind of feed into that curiosity. And I think that's what drew me to Acton.
It's so great. So, Sarah, tell us what the makeup of the school is now. How many learners do you have? What are their ages? And what is perhaps a typical day or week like for an Acton Invictus learner?
All right, so we are growing slowly. We just moved to our new location, which is technically Liberty Hill, Georgetown, Leander. If you ever come out this way, it'll make sense. So it's almost like starting over, because it was 15 minutes from our old location, and we, lost some of our families just because of the commute. So right now we have two.
Can I just interrupt? Sorry, can I just
Oh, yeah.
interrupt you for 1 second, Sarah? So I want to hear more about where you are now, but what was the catalyst for the move?
So, Acton gives their licenses based on location, and my location was for the city of Leander. And I spent over 8 months looking for our next location. We'd outgrown the facilities at the church, and their new facility still hasn't broken ground. And so I kept hitting roadblocks, as many Acton owners do, with permitting and regulations, and some of the requirements by the city were crazy for a small learning community. And so kept hitting dead end after dead end. There was one commercial space that I was in negotiations for, but I realized like it didn't fit with my vision for the future of Invictus. We're moving towards more of a nature-based Acton, and I just kept going to look at this property. I would drive by it all the time, and I'm like, where are our heroes going to play? And I just didn't feel solid about it. So I let that one go. And then a property on the outskirts of Leander, which is technically like Liberty Hill, popped up. And so I requested permission from Acton, Maine. I was like, I know this technically is not Leander, but can I move here? And they gave me permission to do that. So yeah, so we're now on 2.5 acres, lots of trees to climb, lots of dirt to play in. So that was it was time for us to move, and nothing was working out in Leander. So.
And how many learners do you have now? What are their age ranges? Yeah.
So in our Spark studio, we have ages 3 to 6-ish. We have 13 learners enrolled in there. And then in our Discovery studio, it's 7-ish to 11-ish. And we have 10 learners in there. So.
And are your plans to continue adding additional grades and ultimately a launchpad studio for the high school age students over time?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is definitely the plan. It's, the owners network, they emphasize that you really need to start your middle school studio with heroes who have gone up through the elementary program, just because a lot of the skills that are needed to be in the middle school studio, learning to set your own learning goals, learning how to manage your time without an adult telling you how to manage your time, leadership, leading Socratic discussions, those things are cultivated in the elementary studio. So yeah, so we are growing slowly into our middle school studio. And then later our launch pad, yeah.
Yeah. And just Sarah, another question for you. You talked about the roadblocks that you encountered that so many education entrepreneurs encounter, especially around space and zoning. I wonder if you can share some specifics about what were some of the barriers for you in finding space.
Right. So for example, there was one property that Tim had actually helped me find that was, 3 acres. It was a house with a couple of outbuildings. And although it was on a street that had a mix of commercial and private properties, the city, if I was going to be operating a business out of this property, and it was fully fenced, they wanted me to do a lot of changes in the house to bring it up to compliance, as though it were going to be, a massive institutional school. And just the changes in the house alone were going to cost upwards of $60,000. They wanted us to change the curb. They raise it up to a certain height for commercial reasons, commercial landscaping. The gravel drive was not acceptable. We would have to pave it all. So we're talking of, a small learning community having to invest over $200,000+ to change that.
Yeah. For a lease.
For a lease.
Yeah, for a lease. Like, it wasn't like she was buying it.
Right.
Wow.
So things of that nature. Making sure bathrooms are ADA compliant, which if we had a learner that had that need, I would happily make that change, but we didn't. So just just the place we ended up is in an ETJ. So that means it's kind of like outside of city limits. So it's not, doesn't have all the requirements. The only thing that we had to do is what the fire marshal, indicated. So it made it much easier to move in.
So Tim, you're an entrepreneur. I'm curious about your perspective on education entrepreneurship. Do you feel like there are potentially more of these regulatory hurdles or barriers for education entrepreneurs like Sarah than entrepreneurs in other sectors? Or I guess what is your what are your thoughts on that as an entrepreneur more generally?
Yeah, so I know we're in Texas, and so there's this huge kind of back and forth between school choice. And I think one of the biggest arguments was that it was for like wealthy people, and I don't consider, I think I'm not to go into politics, but I think having somebody like Sarah being able to provide a different type of service to allow students to learn differently, and I think it's going to naturally compound over the years, is going to actually benefit the child. And so whether there's a voucher for the school or not, I think just to allow maybe a little bit more incentive for somebody like Sarah to operate more kind of like on a fair playing field will allow actually more families to explore maybe alternative education, which I think is a good thing for everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Tim, because one of the criticisms from opponents of education choice policies, school choice policies that enable education funding to follow students instead of going directly to school systems,
Mhm.
is that, well, there aren't enough schools for those kids, or we don't have private schools for the kids that want to go there to go, so therefore we should just keep the status quo going. And of course, you make the point that part of the reason we may not have more and more of these private schools and interesting, innovative models is because it can be difficult to get these
Mhm.
going, as Sarah just mentioned, because of some of these barriers. So, um,
Yeah.
so yeah. So, Sarah, I'd love to hear now. You're in your third year of running
Mhm.
Acton Invictus, looking back on your experience as a public school teacher and now as someone running, a really totally different educational
Mhm.
model that's learner driven, and self-directed. What's your perspective now, kind of comparing and contrasting those two learning environments?
Um, I love it. I I seeing how happy our learners are when they come to school. Like, I get comments from parents frequently. Like one of the moms that texted me to let me know that her daughter was going to be out 'cause she was homesick with a fever, and that her daughter was mad at her for not letting her go to school. And it's, the opposite of, having a child who fakes being sick so they don't have to go to school. So our learners are happy, they're enthusiastic. We have other people that come to our exhibitions of learning, and some of them have backgrounds in education, traditional education, and they make comments about how confident our learners are and how comfortable they are talking to adults about what they're doing and working on. And I think that's kind of one of the most beautiful aspects of the Acton model is the confidence and the sense of agency that these young people have. They know that their opinions are valued. They know that they are becoming adept at problem solving. Um, and just to see the impact it has, like they hold their heads up high, and that is just so different. If they're taking a longer amount of time to learn multiplying fractions, they feel no shame about that. They're not comparing themselves to their neighbor who's mastered that already. They know they are on their own unique learning journey, and it's not a competition against anyone else. And it's just, it's so exciting to be on this side of it. And, it's a journey. It's a messy learning environment. We're dealing with lots of different personalities and perspectives on the daily, but they have joy and they're still excited to learn. And that was ultimately my goal. So,
Mm.
I wake up invigorated by that. So yeah, it's a privilege to be on this side of it.
Mm. And Tim, what about you as a parent? What are you seeing now with your two children at Acton Invictus? What is their learning like, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, so I think so. Zach, who's 8 now, and then Gracie is 5. So Gracie started after Zach. But just speaking specifically for Zach, since he was there the longest, Sarah kind of hit it on the nail. Confidence. So he naturally is more of an introvert, more shy, reserved. And so being able to see him expand and grow through confidence, I would attribute that to the school. In addition to that, I would say probably his communication skills has drastically gotten better, to the point where he talks like a senior partner at a law firm. I'll give you one example. I like we were having a conversation, and then he said to me, "Dad, like after you're done, I would like to make an extra point." And I'm said, "Excuse me, like you're an 8-year-old, like who talks like that? So knowing that, like he's an active listener, and then being able to allow me to finish my point, and then being able to kind of have his point injected into that. I think that was more of a Socratic thing that they do every single day, and I think that in itself is invaluable, because the reading, the math, the writing, I think any child with the right, any child will be able to learn that. But being able to have those soft skills, I think that's so invaluable.
And how does it compare to your experience having gone through a conventional public school system and now seeing what Zach and Gracie are going through? What is the contrast you see there?
I didn't. That's funny that you asked that. I didn't really know that my voice mattered until probably senior year, when I took theory of knowledge class, and this is an advanced placement class at my high school, and I didn't really get to do debating and any type of analysis among my class probably until senior year. Maybe a little bit in English class and advanced placement English classes, here and there, but nothing to the degree that they're doing it now as an 8-year-old, 7 to an 11-year-old, group. It's pretty incredible.
So I'll ask you a follow-up question to that then, Tim. Again, as an entrepreneur and a parent who was early to kind of dive into this new learning environment for your kids, there's a theory of innovation, the diffusion of innovation curve, which is a bell curve that looks at how innovation sort of gets adopted into the culture. And we think about in kind of innovators on the far left end of this bell curve, and then early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards kind of on the right tail of the bell curve. And I wonder your thoughts on how do we sort of move toward, if I think of you as sort of an innovator, an early adopter, how do we move more families to the sort of early majority and late majority stage of accepting alternative education and alternatives to traditional schooling in a more meaningful way? How do we get them to kind of move
Yeah.
along that innovation embrace?
I think you start to see that really kind of now already, sort of that late stage and sort of that adoption period right now. A lot of entrepreneurs that are quote unquote influencers, or people that are teaching other business owners how to run businesses, they talk more about their personal life. They talk about why they're going to more homeschooling. They talk about alternative education. The reason why I got into Acton was because of some of my mentors, they put their kids into Acton. And I'm like, well, if they're going to do it, and I see them as successful entrepreneurs and their critical thinking and problem solving, there's some dynamic of family there that they trust their kids to go to Acton. And so I start to see that now, but I think one of the things that I start seeing now is that there's going to be a technology that's infused into it. For example, there's synthesis. Elon Musk is right now is having synthesis. There's another school called Alpha. They're doing more of that. I think you're going to see a lot more of technology kind of be infused into it. But generally, the dynamic of kids kind of working together, I think that's something that's you can't really replace, because there's soft skills involved into that. So there's going to be technology that can be infused just to make things better. But that environment, that learning environment, that's going to be irreplaceable. And I think that's going to be where families who like myself realize that they're not a homeschooling family, where they need to really kind of outsource that environment, that learning environment. I think that's going to be where they're going to be turning to a Montessori, an Acton, a Waldorf, and maybe other alternative education systems.
Right. So just hearing from mentors, people in your community that you respect who might be trying something new, and then it doesn't seem so scary. So kind of allowing those innovators and early adopters to take that initial leap, and then feeling that other families might have the confidence to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Sarah, what are you hearing from the families coming to Acton Invictus? Why are they attracted to your model?
Well, a lot of our families are entrepreneurs, and I think that there's a certain mindset, like, they don't mind a certain amount of risk to try something new. A lot of them also, I think, COVID exposed a lot of the problems in the traditional educational model. And so I'm seeing more and more people, like a new enrolled family that we have that starts this in January. They had moved here, and she put her 5-year-old in kindergarten public school for a week, and she was like, nope, he's not going back. She and she had heard about Acton. They had toured one in New Mexico where they had lived prior. And she was like, I'm going to see if there's one around here. So it's people that they want something other than traditional education. They realize that the model just does not work for the 21st century. It just doesn't, it's outdated. And having those soft skills, there is a big movement towards homeschooling also after COVID. And so, I tell families all the time, homeschooling's great. One thing though that I feel like Acton provides that you can't really get with the homeschooling, even with co-ops, is being a part of a tribe. And there's something about bumping up against the same people on the daily, learning to work out conflicts because, things keep happening over and over with the same person. And having, being able to be democratically run with this group of people in the mixed age studio. So I do feel like it has that benefit. But yeah, a lot of our families are hearing about us from friends. So that's the best way for it to grow, and we have so many amazing families at Invictus that I'm just like, I want more of those kinds of families. We'll attract the same people because of the families we have.
Yeah, so are you doing any marketing, or is it pretty much all word of mouth recommendations from current
So
families?
yeah, so we do run some, Facebook ads, but a lot of it is becoming word of mouth. Like I had a lady tour last week, and she had heard about it from her hairstylist, who had mentioned that she was planning to come do a tour. And so, it's just kind of creating a life of its own. And some of our current families, they will advertise in their local mom groups, sharing their testimonial about their child's experience at Invictus. And so, yeah.
Great. So I'd love to wrap up with the two of you with your advice to others, starting with you, Sarah, of advice to other prospective education entrepreneurs, especially current public school teachers or other educators who might be within the traditional system but have that entrepreneurial itch and believe that education can and should be different. What advice do you have for them to kind of strike out on their own and launch their own alternative education environment?
Mm. So I would suggest that first of all, they start talking to people in their community, sharing their vision. Create a plan, write down the parts of the learning environment that you feel are essential for how children learn best. And then, yeah, making networking, but, having coffees and lunches and dinners with movers and shakers in the community. And talking to families, see what they are looking for. Um, but again, I don't recommend opening your school in 6 months. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone, but kind of start laying the groundwork, start looking for space. Do you want to start out of your own home where you have low overhead and you can start small that way, being the teacher or the guide yourself? So yeah, just start planning now, and it's attainable. It is. I mean, I like to tell people if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Tim, what about you? What advice would you have for parents listening who might be wanting something different for their kids, thinking about alternatives to the conventional system? What advice do you have?
Yeah, I think the same kind of thought process as Sarah is like I would write down. So I did the same exercise. So I wrote down everything that I wanted my child to experience and have, and not necessarily be like the best math person or anything. It was more like, so I wrote down I wanted him to have emotional intelligence. I wanted him to always love learning and be curious. I wanted him to be self-confident, and then I went out and I looked for ways to educate him on that. And so I think that's kind of why it brought me to Acton. On the flip side to that, it would be, what don't you like about public school? And I think a lot of it had to do with when we first started, a lot of it was too rigid. It didn't allow them to explore their creativity. It didn't allow them to kind of find themselves very early. And I found that I didn't really understand what my strengths were until I was like 28 or 29. And I was like, why, being an entrepreneur now, I wish that I had more problem solving and critical thinking skills very early on, and knew my talents a lot earlier. And so that's kind of why I wanted to provide that for my child. And so for parents, I would just recommend maybe just doing more listening to podcasts around education, and that would give the confidence to actually make that transition.
And just as a follow-up there, Tim, you said you heard about Acton through a podcast you were listening to that wasn't necessarily about education. Is that right? It was an entrepreneur podcast, and you happened to kind of stumble upon this, and
Yeah.
then you went down the rabbit hole
Yes, exactly. Yep.
of exploring education options. That's great.
Yes.
So Sarah, what is the best way for my listeners and viewers to find out more about Acton Invictus and connect with you?
All right. So the best way is through our website, invictusleander.org. There's multiple ways on there to contact me. And yeah, they're also Facebook and Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, best wishes on the future growth and success of Acton Invictus. Sarah Max and Tim Tran, thank you so much for being on the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for having us.
Have a great day.